Hi, everybody. This is Ken Krogue. We're still waiting for a few folks to log in. We've got a quick little clip to share, and then we'll be on in just a moment.
Speed. Speed is everything. But do you know what's better than speed? Smart speed. Using information to push performance. Using data to score more, win more, and even sell more. That's what we do. We help you sell smarter, faster, and more. We use data to predict and prescribe who to call, when to call, and even which deals will close. Do you know who you should contact if it's raining in the Northeast and sunny in the Midwest? Or which opportunity you should focus on during the baseball playoffs? What about which of your leads is ready to buy right now? We know, and we can tell you what to do, all at the click of a button. We do the heavy thinking so you can do the selling. It's not just speed, it's smart speed. It's sales acceleration built on the world's first predictive cloud for sales. So you can sell smarter, sell faster, sell more, and sell anywhere.
All right, just a little reminder how this will work today. The webinar will be about 45 minutes of going back and forth between myself and our two other presenters today. I'll introduce them here in just a moment. If you've got questions, type them in as you think of them in the Q&A box along the way. And don't forget the hashtag Inside Sales Webinar. Join the conversation. This is being recorded. We'll make it available and tell you how to receive it at the end. And we will have all kinds of additional content coming from this today, but we're quite excited. Also, just a reminder of our Sales Acceleration podcast. We do this every week with Gabe Larson and Steve Ehrer. Feel free to join us out on InsideSales.com resources podcast. You can look at previous ones. And I'm really excited today to introduce our other two speakers. Again, I'm Ken Krogue, founder and chief evangelist at InsideSales.com. It's fun to be back speaking and talking a little bit after my exciting truck accident. I'm almost coming up on an anniversary of a year today. And joining me is John Miller, founder and CEO at Engagio, and Rich Neal, founder and CEO at mPathDiscovery. Welcome, you guys. Thanks for being with us today.
Very excited to be here. I love this panel.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you, Ken.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of fun things we'll be talking about. This is a really exciting area of content today. We got some of the best in the world joining us on the topic of account-based everything. And I want to go ahead and launch John Miller, who's former CEO of Marketo, and one of the founders there, this really exciting new organization called Engagio. Tell us about it, John, and get us launched in this whole topic today, would you?
Absolutely. So yeah, so we're all about talking about account-based marketing and account-based sales in the enterprise, or what I call account-based everything. So what we're going to cover today is I'm going to kick things off by explaining why this whole idea of account-based everything is so important, and then I'll introduce a framework or a three-step process for how to do it in the enterprise. Ken will share best practices and part of that. And then Ryan and I will cover the other two steps, and then we'll wrap with some just kind of tips and hacks. So no further ado, let's dive right into the content here, starting with this whole idea of why account-based everything. Why is this so important? Well, to set it up, as Ken said a minute ago, I was previously the co-founder and CMO over at Marketo, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And at Marketo, we built a really strong demand generation engine that was responsible for driving as much as 80% of all of our sales pipeline. And it worked great leveraging content and other kind of inbound marketing tactics. But what happened was Marketo started to move up market. We tried to sell more to named accounts in the enterprise. And also, we tried to get better at doing cross-sell into our existing customer base. And what we found was that those inbound demand gen tactics that we were so good at and that worked so well for the small and medium businesses weren't working in the target account, named account side of things. We needed a new set of tactics. And ultimately, we came to start practicing what's now known as account-based marketing. And I think there's a nice analogy to explain the difference here. The analogy is that the traditional kind of marketing, the kind that we were doing originally, that's kind of like fishing with a net. You have your campaign, you throw it out there, and it doesn't matter to you which specific fish you catch. You just care, did I catch enough fish? How many leads did I get? But as soon as you have a list of named accounts, it no longer makes sense to wait around to see if the right people from the right companies happen to swim into your net. You need to reach out to them proactively with targeted tactics, and that's much more like fishing with spears. So what we're talking about today is this rise of this whole new outbound account-based model, that is not about this whole inbound marketing wave. It's going back to the world of outbound, but doing it in a better, more targeted way. Now, on the marketing side of things, this has become known as account-based marketing. And it's hotter than a hot thing in a hot oven on a hot day. Marketers can't get enough of talking about account-based marketing. But here's the thing. I'm a huge fan of account-based marketing. I wrote a whole book on the topic. But I'm increasingly realizing that marketing alone is not sufficient to fish with spears. If you really want to reach out to the right people at the right companies, you can't do it if all you have is marketing channels. If all you're doing is buying ads or holding events or sending direct mail pieces, that's not really sufficient. If you really want to talk to the right people at the right companies, you need a human to call them, to email them personally, to reach out socially, or ideally a combination of all three. Put another way, if account-based, everything is fishing with spears, your sales development team are the tip of the spear. And when done well, account-based sales development is the highest, most effective tactic you have to reach out to target accounts. Now, the problem we have here is you've got a bunch of marketers running around talking about account-based marketing. You got a bunch of account-based sales development people saying that they've got the next big thing. And frankly, you've got account-based selling, which has always been the best practice in the enterprise. And I think that the names here are actually part of the problem. When you talk about account-based marketing, you're perpetuating the silo that this is just a thing for marketers. What we need is a bigger tent, an umbrella that brings all these different functions together to focus on the thing that we're really talking about, which is how do we orchestrate our team selling interactions across departments and channels that we can most effectively achieve our account-based goals. And it's that process that I'm calling account-based everything. Everything covering marketing, sales development, even customer success. So hopefully, I've now convinced you that this is a pretty good thing to be doing. Now let's dive into the more practical details, the three-step process for how do you actually do it. And to set that up, let's take a step back and think again about that kind of demand gen model we were doing at Marketo. That started with the offer. Like we'd have a new white paper we want to promote. Then we figure out how we're going to promote that new offer, pick which channels. For example, hey, let's send an email to people, and then only then, third, would we focus on who we're going to send that email to and pick our segments. But when you're fishing with spears, you flip that whole funnel around. You start with the who. Who am I trying to reach? Which accounts and which people? Then you figure out what. What can I say to those people that will be relevant and resonant? And only third, then do you focus on the channels. How do I actually reach out to them and make the connection? So that's the model, who and what and where. And to focus first on that really important topic, the foundational topic of who are we going after, we're going to turn things back over to Ken.
Thanks, John. And, one of my favorite statements is the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. And I want to just take a minute. We've been really batting this whole account-based thing around. You know, the concept's been around, 25 years. We used to call it a target selling. But I think the technology especially has evolved at the level now where we can go after this many decision maker model. So for me, the first real question is, what is account-based sales? And the closest thing I've been able to come to is it's sales in a multi-decision maker environment. And that's what's different than the traditional high-speed, high-velocity model. We found, though, that even in the high-velocity model, you've probably got 2 or 3 folks involved in the decision-making. We've been researching this, and the Corporate Executive Board says that on average there's 5.4 decision makers. IDC is saying it's high as 7. In our world, it ranges, 3 to 4 up to 7 or 8. But the bottom line is this. We've got to really get good at targeting the specific needs, the personalization required of these multiple decision makers. And what's most important is we've got to find the people, the decision maker with authority. And so this model here, the qualification model, I think is more relevant than ever. Remember back in the 60s, IBM came out with this model called BANT. It was an acronym that stood for Budget, Authority, Need, and Timing. But in 2010, research was done by Demand Gen showing that only 2 out of 10 companies even set annual purchasing decisions based on a budget. So the budget model really has moved. In fact, with this new model, we call it ANIM. Here it is right here. We've moved the money or the budget item to the tail end, and authority has now moved to the front. And what we have found is you've got to get really good at targeting the person or group of people, and that's the whole point of account-based. You've got to find the group of people involved in the decision-making process and get in touch with them quickly. We're going to talk about what we call the path to power here shortly, which is, we think, really the key. In fact, if you don't find the path to power, you can get shut down in a lot of time-wasting effort. After authority, you've still got to target need. Organizations that have need are the ones that are going to be able to buy from you and will stick around once the purchase decision is made. We're going to talk about that as well. So, again, authority is more important than ever. And I've got a whole section of this coming out. My new book, Sales in the Cloud. While I've been recovering, this has been what I've been busy working on. There's a whole section in this, and we'll be announcing some of the research that we'll be talking about today with Rich. But let's jump right into what I call the circle of influence, which leads to the pathway to power. Now, this is a model that we've used quite a bit in the past, and people always ask, okay, how do you find your circle of influence? Let me explain this diagram here. For us, 12 years ago when we started, the person who would reach out to us was the sales manager, and then it moved up to sales director, and now it's the vice president of sales over the outside and inside sales function. And that's primarily the primary person driving a purchase with us. Now, every organization needs to figure out what theirs is, and people ask me all the time, well, how do we do this? Well, my recommendation is that you go back into and you examine your account base, and you look at the notes and the interactions, and you see who is it that's primarily driving the purchase decisions for whatever product or service you sell. Then you've got to look at the group that surrounds that person. In our world, we've got the CFO, both the technology and the marketing play in, and the operational. You can see we've got a pretty good chunk of people involved in this decision-making process. What we have found, though, is that the really good salespeople are the ones who navigate it best to what we call the pathway to power. In other words, where is the real decision-making authority for people who can say yes? Now, that's not to say the other people are not important, because they definitely are. Because here's what we found, and we all know this, I think, who've been in sales a long time, is there's only a few people who can say yes, but there's quite a few people who can say no. And so what you've got to do, now, I don't want to say that the marketing VP in this diagram is powerless. That's definitely not the case. But what we have found is they don't have the power to say yes to this, to a purchase with us, for example, but they can definitely say no. So again, in your own company, in your own pathway to power analysis and design, you've got to go back and you've got to look. You've got to interview your real veteran salespeople. You've got to look at the data interactions, the notes that have been taken, and you've got to chart who is involved in saying yes. And that's where you really want to have a strong connection when you begin this discussion. A lot of times, rookie salespeople will start too low in the food chain. They'll start at a different silo, and then they'll spend a lot of time, and usually it's wasted time, trying to seek for the yes. My friend Josiane Fagan loves the phrase, get past the no-po, the person with no power. If you don't do that early on, you're going to be spinning circles. So we have a methodology that we do, and it's a really great way to start here. And what we've learned is that, again, back to Anim, the authority, the A of Anim is authority, is really the contact person. The N for need is the company. You've got to be good at navigating a company with need and a person with authority. And here's what we recommend you do. We play sort of 20 questions. This is a manual version of our pretty high-end predictive analytics model, but you can get started with this. And these right here in our world were the top 10 questions to determine if a company is qualified situationally for our solution. And notice that of the top 10 questions for the company qualification, 7 of them are needs-based. And that's what we have found. When you're determining need, it's really around the company side of things. When you're determining authority, it's around the person. So pre-existing technology, for example, are they using Salesforce? How many employees and sales reps? What industry? There's definitely a sweet spot typically in the industries that can buy your stuff versus those who don't. Do they have an existing inside sales model? What business type? What buying mode are they in? Are they currently actively growing? Are they feeling a pain, or are they just status quo? Have they defined a timeline around their purchase? Have they demonstrated funding capability, and do they have budgeted funding? Now, that's, again, we mentioned earlier, budgeting is not a negative thing, but what we found is most companies do not predefine annual budgets, but when they get serious, they start looking at making sure there's budgeting set aside. So those 10 questions from our perspective, and again, this data will be available later, but you really want to drill down on this screen and on the next one. These are the top 10 questions we have found. The next is around finding the right decision maker, the contact. And we start here with the right title level. Are they high enough up the food chain? I guess for us, it starts at the vice president level. Title function. Are they in the sales function directly, sales operations, or are they more in marketing or IT? Again, in our world, marketing and IT can say no, but they don't say yes to a person or to a purchase decision. In your business, you're going to have to determine where that's at. How much degree of influence does this person have? Sometimes they might have a title and not be very influential. Other times they might not have the title and be extremely influential. You're going to have to navigate and map that. Is this infrastructure management directed or not? That's a big one. Now, this is interesting. Question 5, are they easy to reach? We have found that plays a pretty significant significant level in making this sale. Can you actually reach this person? Are they involved in that decision-making role? And so notice that 6 of the top 10 questions around a qualification for a contact is authority. And so here's the question. If for example, and then what we do is we give 5 points per question. We even weight it a little bit. So the first 10 questions of company data is worth 50 points. The second 10 questions are worth 50 points. The whole thing adds up to 100. This is what we nickname manualytics. We're doing it manually. But it allows you to objectively qualify the who, as John said, should be involved in this decision-making process. Now, for example, if your company score is low, let's say it's a 22, but your contact data is high, let's say it's a 47, you know that that company is actually not very situationally qualified. They don't need you. Although you might have a right decision maker, they're going to be hard to close, and once they're closed, they're probably going to attrit because they really don't need you. Conversely, if your company score is high, let's say 43, and your contact score is low, say 17, that means you got a company who needs you, but you're talking to the wrong person. So that's how this model is used. Again, we call it Manualytics. It's something you can do yourself. Again, those 2 slides will be available. It's probably the 2 key slides of my portion of the presentation today. Now, we have found that over time, there's way more data and qualification in the data involved than just those 20, and that's what we've put together in what we call Neuralytics. But overall, that's a great place to start, and we've learned that if you start with well-qualified data, that you're going to make a lot of impact. Now, my director of our Inside Sales Labs, his name's Gabe Larson. He's out on the road right now. I just spoke with him before we got on this call. He's just leaving a company that's trying to implement account-based selling with 50 sales development reps, and he said their biggest question was just what we covered. It's how do I even find the right accounts to go after, and who would be the people in that organization? So once that is in place, it's time to jump into what exactly your messaging should be, and I'll turn it back here to John.
Great. Well, thank you. I love the Manualytics concept, and this is the general idea of using intelligence to focus on the right accounts and then the right people. Now, once we know who we're going after, we have to go after them. And I think it's important to keep in mind that in most cases, that means we're going after strangers, people we don't have a previous relationship with, which means we're knocking on their doors. We're reaching out to them. And there's a name for this. When done badly, it's called spam and cold calling. And I get, 10 years ago, we had this whole rise of marketing spam. These days, I see the rise of sales spam. More and more people sending, what seem to be, human emails, but are really just pretty much automated crap. And you get stuff like this one here. Obviously it doesn't make me feel like they spent a lot of time researching me and my business. But the fundamental problem is it's not about helping me, it's about selling them. When I get crap like this, I opt out, I tune out, I toss out. I hit the spam button. And what is so important to realize is that it's so easy to hit the spam button these days and block, and have somebody block your ability to ever reach them and hurt your ability to reach other people. Why in God's name would we ever risk our ability to contact the most important people at the most important companies by sending them a generic templated email? These are the right important people at the right important companies. We have to increase our odds. We have to do better. Fortunately, we can. And we can do that by sharing ideas that might be relevant to their business. 75% of executives will read unsolicited marketing materials that contain ideas relevant to their business. And that means talking to their specific industry, talking to their specific business, and as Rich is going to talk about in just a minute, talking to their specific persona and what's going to matter to them. When we can bring this kind of commercial insight to the table, that's how we're going to open doors and connect with people. If anybody's read the excellent book, The Challenger Sale, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about tailoring, teaching new business ideas and tailoring that to the specific person. Now, to do that, you need to do work. It requires research. It requires insights. You can do, there's great technologies out there I'll talk about in a minute to help streamline this. But fundamentally, you need, for your top accounts, you need to know what's happening in their industry, what's happening in their specific company, what are the different buying centers, and how do the individuals in that buying center relate to each other? What's the history and context of your relationship with the account? Do you have connections and paths into the account? And do you have stuff in common or other kinds of door openers? You want to have an account plan for your top accounts that answers all these questions. For your lower level accounts, you may not do all of this, but you still might figure out 3 things in 3 minutes that you can use to customize the first 10% and the last 10% of an email or piece of content. Now, as I just said, a big part of getting this personalization and relevance right tends to be talking to their industry and to their persona. And to double click on all that, I'd like to hand things back over to Rich.
Hey, thanks, John. So again, my name is Richard Neal. I'm the founder of mPathDiscovery. We are a business and market intelligence company. We produce actionable intelligence, obviously with a business and market foci. So when Ken and John approached me with this opportunity, it was kind of a unique challenge. One of the key challenges with any kind of large-scale market and business intelligence is to try to make the output look as simple as possible. I think we've achieved it here, but the challenge itself was enormous. That in effect of given the entire business ecosystem represented by role, per role, in terms of what they're thinking, how do they define their biggest challenges and obstacles? So very first, what we do is obviously we produce actionable intelligence. We comb the internet. We utilize what we call value chain information we can garnish from within our clients. Then about 80% of the overall harvest comes external. We have mathematical models that are based upon very sound machine learning foundation. And we go through heuristic cycles to refine, to understand what the goal is, to really nail down the who in your account-based selling. And more importantly, what they're thinking. So from the analytical corpus we harvested for this challenge, we had about 623 million artifacts that we began with. The age range from timestamps and other indications of postings and publishing was about approximately 3 years. So relatively new, this harvest of information corpus, relatively new data. We did put parameters on here. It was limited to that of the continental United States. And the languages, we have the ability to do any human and constructed language. However, we did limit this particular crawl and this analysis to American English. So the findings. Okay, our focus here, what matters most to these business personae. And I do apologize for some of the small font. However, there's a lot of information to convey in a very short area. What we did is we aligned title and function, as well as several verticals, 9 to be specific, starting with generic. On the top row, you see the C-suite, and that's a little bit nonlinear, but after that, on the following rows, everything is linear straight to the right and down based upon vertical. You can start to see some of the inherent friction between title and hierarchy, focus of the guy or lady above them versus what their focus is, all the way down to support staff, and then the sales entities. I'm really sorry about that.
Hey, Rich, this is Ken. Can I jump in for a minute?
Yeah, sure, Ken.
Rich?
Go right ahead.
Guys, I want the world to sort of know how cool this is. This is like, we've heard all this propaganda going on about the NSA listening to all of our conversations, and that really cool. One of my favorite shows now I watch on Netflix is Person of Interest, and that machine that they built that listens to every. This is sort of what you've done, isn't it, Rich? I mean, you've been listening to 623 million conversations to see what these different title levels and title functions are thinking about. Isn't that right?
It is, and I appreciate that, Ken. It is an enormous task that we've refined over about 6-year time span. By trade, I'm an algorist, and we overlay this with a discipline. So it's just not just your plain vanilla data science. What we're using is a social science that I helped pioneer called digital sociology. So we're understanding the interests, the opinions, the attitudes of the focus groups for which we're trying to define. And once we nail that down, we're then able to extrapolate behaviors. So once we have behaviors, then we can take it one step farther and put an additional layer on there called predictive. And the output there is based upon an assortment of inputs, so the market, what's happening on a macroeconomic standpoint, all the way down to an individual company. And then understand outputs based upon our clients wanting to start a new product development or competitive intelligence, or just simply understanding how a marketing campaign will resonate to their core market. So the outputs there is based upon probability. We have a subset of could-bes. We have, we basically cover the history, the current facility of our client's interest, as well as the projective or future state. So no, I appreciate that, Ken. Thank you. So again, absolutely. So the matrix itself is pretty self-explanatory. What you're having is the top level interests, and this is based upon, for those of you in data science, it's rather simplistic in pattern recognition. I say that at a very high level, very simplistic, but nonetheless, shifting through our corpus, an enormous amount of what we would call big data, we're able to resolve this based upon identification, such as role, as we've shown here, across the different verticals for which we're under observation, from starting with generic. And as I understand, you'll get these notes at the end of the presentation, all the way through to the last one there, to biz dev. There we are. I wanted to point out one thing here that was interesting from a sociological perspective. So you make your way all the way through the C-suite, all the way EVP, VP, down to director, then you hit managers. You see definitely a line of demarcation with their interests compared to everyone above them. But more importantly, what you'd see on the support staff is very interesting. They're basically reflecting their mission statement. So it says a lot about empowerment once we get down in the hierarchy of staff. There was no real coherent anything individual outside of that. They were extremely just singing the corporate song. So very interesting output there, one that we didn't expect and hadn't seen before. So I just wanted to make that note. And of course, sales based upon vertical, very vocal and what their concerns, what their top level ideas and thoughts are. So in short, just really quick, as you can see here, we utilize behavioral science, we utilize big data, and we drive to thoughts and actions that are actually actionable to our clients. We model markets, we model participants within markets, and we understand the dynamic issues. Therewithin, we understand the dynamic issues that affect you. So that's mPathDiscovery, and I think I'm supposed to hand this back over to John. John?
Awesome. Cool data. I love it. Really, I like good stuff. Because again, it's so important to, figure out then exactly, once we know who we're going after, what to say. And your data shows exactly how to talk to people by role and level. Now it's time to actually take all that insight, reach out to people. So, there's a whole palette of tactics that we can use in both marketing and in sales and sales development. On the marketing side, you can hold events and dinners. So, that in-person interaction is a really powerful way to connect with target accounts. You can send them mail and packages. Just think about how many emails you get per day versus how many packages show up on your desk. You can see why direct mail can stand out. And then you can advertise to them and so on. But as I said earlier, if you really want to connect, you send them a human email, and by that I mean not something that comes from Marketo or your marketing system, something that comes from a person. You can call them or leave voicemails. You don't expect people to return your calls, but the voicemail can increase your likelihood of getting a response on the email. And then you can reach out to them over social channels if you do it in an authentic and helpful way. So my real point here is that you have lots of channels. You have multiple touches that you can do to people over points in time. What I encourage people to think about is how do you combine all of these together into what we call a play. And a play is your coordinated interaction strategy for team selling, for how everybody on your team is going to be interacting with everybody at the target account. And your team includes marketing and sales and executives and so on, and their team includes all the different level members of the buying committee. And when you really want to engage with them, you want to orchestrate all those interactions together. A very simplistic example of a play that is sort of single-threaded is this, based on an original one from Topo. Imagine picking a target account and spending some time researching them, and then building some awareness by doing advertising to that account. And then on day 0, dropping some direct mail into that account, and then using that package delivery as a reason to kick off the triple touch, to kind of reach out to the right people. And then if they don't respond to that, you can put together a whole series of additional steps over time. Now, there are dozens of people out there who can share with you different play templates. The one piece of advice I have is that all these plays are like diets. They work if you stick to them. So try different things out, test them, see what works. I do get the question when I talk about plays about what roles different people should have. And because this is slightly different than your traditional model of a cadence of just one SDR going out to one person. I used the word team selling before, and I think that's really what we're talking about here. You have the coach. The coach's job is to design the play or write the playbook. And that's typically going to be an SDR manager or somebody in marketing, or ideally them working together. You have the quarterback, and that's the person who calls the play. Says, we're going to do this play at this account. And that's typically going to be the account executive, the salesperson, or the account manager. And then lastly, you have multiple players in multiple positions. And I've alluded to this before, but on an American football team, you wouldn't put just 11 wide receivers on the field because they'd get crushed and nobody would throw the ball to them. And you wouldn't have 11 linemen on the field because they just stand there and the ball wouldn't move. If you really want to move the ball down the field at your target accounts, you need your whole team. You need to have players in multiple positions working together as a team in a coordinated fashion. You need your executives reaching out at the right time. You need marketing doing the right things at the right time. You need your account executives and your sales development reps working together in a coordinated fashion. That's what we mean when we talk about running plays at target accounts. All right, so a couple other points to wrap things up before we get to Q&A. Just things to keep in mind. The first is that if you're going to tackle target accounts with an account-centric lens, you need to solve the problem of lead-to-account matching. This has always been a problem in Salesforce, that leads don't tie to accounts, which means you can be looking at the account object in Salesforce and have no insight or ability to understand that you might have dozens or hundreds of people from that account, from that company in your CRM system, but you can't see or roll up any of their activity at the account level. And then worse, you have routing problems. I'm sure this has happened to all of your companies at one point. You're about to close a deal at a company. Somebody, decision maker for that company comes to your website for the first time, fills out a form because they want to download something to learn about you. You route that quote-unquote lead to some hapless SDR who calls them really, really fast, but has no clue that you actually are trying to close a deal with them this week. In order to solve this lead-to-account matching, you should be looking at the email address and the company name, the IP address, any signals you can, and then do a matching to try to match leads to the right accounts, and so that you can solve that problem. Engagio helps with that. There's other vendors out there who do it. Frankly, I don't care who you use, but I'm saying that you have to solve this problem to really tackle anything account-based. Another fun idea I'd just like to throw out there is I see the market moving away from the idea of MQLs, or marketing qualified leads. Because the problem is leads are person-centric. They work in net fishing, but in the spear fishing world, we need to focus not on individual leads, but on marketing qualified accounts, or MQAs. And an MQA tells you that an account is hot by both the depth of engagement across the account as well as the breadth, i.e. you want to have engagement from the right personas across the account to have an MQA. My last point I want to make is that your metrics in an account-based world are different. The traditional marketing metrics tend to be focused on counting leads and quantity. Did I catch enough fish? But in the account-based world, we need to focus on quality. Are we connecting and influencing the right people at the right accounts? And so I have 5 metrics I recommend companies use that complements the traditional categories, of like number of dials, number of meetings, and so on. These metrics are, number 1, coverage. Do we just have the right contacts for the account? Awareness. Do these accounts have any clue who we are? Do they ever visit our website? Do they ever open our emails? Engagement is the holy grail. Engagement's all about time. Do the right people from the right accounts spend time with us? And is that engagement deepening? And if so, that's what we're looking for. Reach is a measure of focus. Let's say we hold a webinar. I don't care how many people came to the webinar. I care how many of the right people from the right accounts came to the webinar. And the higher that percentage, the more efficient that marketing channel is to reach the right people at the right accounts. And lastly, impact is about correlations. So that webinar I just talked about, we can look at all the accounts who had somebody who attended that webinar and see if over time those accounts ended up having better win rates. And if they do, then I can say that perhaps that webinar positively impacted my win rate. The mnemonic to remember these metrics is I care. Impact, coverage, awareness, reach, and engagement. Okay, I just want to wrap things up just by talking about what I call the account-based everything market map, which covers all the different technologies out there. And what this market map does here is it maps out vendors in the selection column, which accounts are we going after, which people, the what column, which is all about the insights to help us understand what should we say to people, and then the various channels that you can use to interact with people, including orchestrating the interactions, and at the bottom, the infrastructure layer, which is about the lead to account matching, the NQA scoring, lead routing, and those types of things. So, inside sales plays on the who side, especially with the predictive analytics, as well as they're a great tool in the human email and phone sides. Engagio, you see where we play, kind of, and so on, and why everybody, kind of who competes with who and who's partners with who. So my key takeaways here, I finish every presentation I give with what I call the tweetable takeaways for anyone who's too lazy to think about what to tweet yourself. But at the high level, it's recognizing that, as hot as account-based marketing is, it's not sufficient. What we need is account-based everything. Outbound does not need to mean interrupting people and causing them to hit the spam button. If we use insights and research and the kind of stuff that Rich shared, we can really maximize relevance and talk to our prospects with relevant commercial business insight. To do that well requires coordinating these account-based plays across the entire team for maximum impact. And then lastly, I really do think lead to account matching is the foundation for success. If you want to learn more, I have a book that I've written, The Clear and Complete Guide to Account-Based Marketing. It's normally $20, but you can get it for free on our website at engagio.com/guide. And then I know there's some other great resources out there, so I'm going to hand things back to Ken to wrap things up and take us into Q&A.
Great. Thank you, John. That was awesome. We get requests a lot about sales cadence, and it has a whole new ball game in terms of an account-based model with multiple decision makers. But we have this downloadable resource, How to Create a Winning Sales Cadence and Improve Contact Rates. It's done by Gabe Larson, who's now our Director of Inside Sales Labs. So we're pretty excited. He's the one I mentioned out on the road right now. And I wanted to go ahead and open up Q&A. We've got quite a few questions here. We've got a little bit of time, so we're going to have a good chance to go through them. This first one's to you, Rich. And again, I wanted to really thank Rich. There was a lot of effort and time and expense went into gathering that matrix. Those slides that you gathered or that you showed earlier, Rich, maybe you could talk about, if someone wants to get a Sentience, sort of a matrix like that, for their own particular area of focus, what would the process be? I mean, how involved is what you just did that you demonstrated here before in those slides?
Sure. Well, you're very welcome, Ken. I appreciate the appreciation there. Yeah, it is a rather big undertaking, and if someone was interested in kind of delving deeper or actually customizing the research based upon their own focus, that's something we obviously can do. We have a product line that we're able to offer, starting from very, very simple research, spot of the moment, we call them snapshots, all the way into more subscription-based research systems that go from 6-month subscriptions all the way to 12-month subscriptions, where you're really starting to utilize heuristics and understand the impacts and effectors of your marketplace. So you get that really, really detailed, granular intelligence based upon the nuances of what makes your market tick. So no, I appreciate the question as well as the appreciation. Thanks, Ken.
Well, and I wanted to make sure the audience is aware of what those slides are. We asked Rich to give us a generic overview by title level, first of all. So the rows are everything from the CEO, the C-level down to the VP, to the director, manager, staff, and employee. So the different levels. What are their attitudes, opinions, and interests? And what's the primary one that they care about? And then we wanted to see how it changed by the different departments in a company. So that should be a really good first step. What you would do is you'd combine those 3 slides together. The metrics was too wide for Rich to show it all on one slide. But you'd combine those slides together, and you would have a complete matrix that gives us a really good place to start for your sales reps to know what people are thinking at those different title levels and title functions. So that one's very powerful. We've got another question here, and this one is by Tabitha. And John, I'd love you to respond to this one. How do you define a company's timeline or the contact's urgency? What can you do with the data of intent, and is progressive profiling possible from inbound leads? What do you recommend to measure and capture this information? Again, timeline and urgency.
Yeah, well, I think you have to look at signals that you have access to kind of on your own site, if you will, and then signals that you might get kind of off-site. I think in terms of your own site, when companies are visiting your website, if they're downloading content, if they're responding to your sales emails, right? You can basically connect to all these different signals to figure out who's spending time with you. And the more time they're spending, I think the more likely they are to have, kind of some timing and urgency kind of right around now. That's looking on your own site. Externally, there are some data vendors that tie into the ad networks to try to get a sense of what kinds of topics are people at given companies reading. And if you see a surge in a topic that's relevant to you, that might suggest that that company is going into a buying cycle around that topic right now. And those can include vendors like Bombora, the Big Willow, Prelytics, and so on. When we send out the slides, we'll have a copy of my market map that will show them. So Tabitha, I hope that answers the question you're looking for. It's really kind of any kind of activity or behavior signal you can find across marketing automation, CRM, your website, your email system, your calendar system, in order to kind of see engagement.
And I would add, there's a great book called Saleshood by Eli Cohen, where he talks a lot about compelling events. And he says, the salesperson does not define the compelling event. That's obviously the company. It's got to be a real compelling event to the company and the contact involved. But I would really recommend that you have a look at that, Tabitha. Okay, next question here. This one's really simple. Is this good for a one-man show? In other words, can a single entrepreneur use these methodologies to go after, to do some whale fishing? John, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the who, what, where framework works for anybody, right? I mean, what we're talking about is pick the people that matter to you and actually spend the time to be relevant to them. And so that clearly works for anybody. You probably don't need technology to scale the process if you're a one-man shop. But as you start to scale out a team and you've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 more people, then that's where technologies are going to provide you the ability to have that same kind of one-to-one personalization, but at greater scale.
Oh, that's great. And Rich, you might want to weigh in on this one next. It's how do these data insights on buyers help figure out specifically which products and positions to position, which product and solutions to position, given most people want to increase revenue, reduce costs, etc. What are your thoughts on that? In fact, let's all weigh on this, but Rich specifically, do you feel like they can use these buyers' persona matrices to help choose which products to actually position to the buyer?
Well, without a doubt, Ken. In fact, this is the underlying premise with the account-based programs. You need to understand to a customized extent what your target is, how they're voicing what they're interested in, the positioning, the parameters of what they're interested in. So if you do have a product portfolio, you're able to better match your product with what they're telling the world as they're interested in purchasing. So with that match, obviously equates to value.
I agree. I think, I love what John said earlier, recommending the book, The Challenger Sale. You've really got to tailor your offering to the needs of the specific buyer persona, and that helps you choose your product to position with them. Now, this is an interesting one. This is very controversial. John, let's have you go after it. Is marketing really ready to let sales be the quarterback?
That is a good question. I guess the first thing I'd say is I don't know if marketing has a choice. Because typically most sales executives I've seen, especially enterprise sales executives, they're going to run the plays they're going to run. I think the best chance marketing has is to try to achieve that role of being the coach. In other words, give sales a great playbook that has relevant messaging, right? That has quote-unquote approved messaging, that coordinates your marketing interactions. And if marketing can be the coach there, then they're going to, I think, be able to maintain the influence that they want to have while still letting sales run the plays they're going to run. What do you think?
Got it. I agree. I don't know if marketing really is, but I love your answer. It better be, because it's so huge now where these silos, the walls have got to fall, and we got to start working together. I'm finding that that's constantly an issue. Here's another question. What is your recommended volume of accounts and contacts to run through a play to keep it personalized and targeted? So I'm assuming that basically means how many accounts should be assigned to each sales rep going forward? What are your thoughts on that, John?
So that's a really important topic. I think the answer is the right number of accounts is the number of accounts that you can deliver on the required level of personalization. And here's what I mean by that. You might have one group of accounts that, let's just say you call them Tier 1. And these Tier 1 accounts, you're going to write a 30-page account plan, right? Because you're going after GE, and GE has 14 subdivisions, and each of those have subdivisions. And you're going to research and understand everything about this account. And every time you send an interaction with that account, it's going to go through you and be personalized or at least approved. No generic messages, right? So that you might have that tier of account. A given rep can maybe handle 1, 2, 3, not that many at that level. You might have a second tier where you're saying they're not ever going to get a generic marketing message. Every interaction is going to be personalized by a human. We're going to research these accounts, but it's not going to be nearly the same depth, right? It's going to be sort of mini profiles. And a given rep there can probably handle 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe more. You might have a third tier where, sometimes they get generic marketing interactions, but we're still going to try to reach out to them in a relevant challenger sales style way. And maybe a rep there can handle a few hundred, 100 maybe 150. And so I think the key here is, figure out what does it mean for you to be a Tier 1 account or Tier 2 or Tier 3, and then figure out how much resource can you really invest. And the last thing I'll say is, let's say you say that something's a Tier 2 account, right, and you're just finding that you just can't keep up, with always making sure that every interaction with them is personalized. Well, that's an argument that you have too many Tier 2 accounts.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Next question. What kind of activities can be included for MQA criteria? Is it anything logged in Salesforce.com or Marketo? Thoughts on that, you guys?
Yeah, the way I look at it is, first of all, you're assuming it's a good fit account, right? You've said this is one of my target accounts, so by definition, it's one you want. So then the focus is on, are they engaging with you? And that's where we look at the depth and breadth of time. Depth being the total number of minutes, breadth being minutes across the key personas. And then to me, the way you get minutes is, as the question says, any activity that you can find in marketing automation, in CRM, on your website, in your email system, really anything that is a sign of that company spending time with you. Cool.
Rich, I've got another one for you. The matrix that you put out there, and I threw out some different words, attitudes, opinions, and interests. The matrix that you put out there that you showed in those slides, what does that primarily, encompass? You've got sort of a one-sentence summary of is that what they're thinking, what they're feeling? Is it their attitude? Is it their motive? Do a little bit deeper dive on what that data means so our audience can apply it.
Sure. Given the params of the challenge, we had to kind of utilize a very succinct language on what the output would be. So primarily it's the top-level concerns or the biggest ideas for which these particular roles are conversing about, and that's broken down per vertical, per industry focus. So going back just a second, the interest, opinions, and attitudes are the core foundation for which we derive our persona. Oftentimes, companies generally speaking, companies enter the market with a certain target market in mind, and things change over time. And what we're seeing is, time and time again, our clients are really unaware of those dynamic changes on a temporal scale over time. So what we do is we optimize and refine those markets, and oftentimes correct set when things have gone differently and it's not been communicated within the organization itself, or it's not known. So that's where the interest, opinions, and attitudes come from. It's more from the big persona builds. Specific to this matrix, it was just, again, more resonant to pattern matching, what balled up to the top as a premier topic within the params of role in industry.
Gotcha. Thank you. By the way, Mike Taylor just notified me that he's uploaded the slides already. If you refresh your screen, you'll be able to grab them as a download. We've got time for one more question. I think this one's more focused on the account-based everything approach. Speak to the role of customer success in account-based everything. John, why don't you take a stab at that one?
Yeah, well, so two pieces. One, handoffs between functions tend to be a place where things fall down. And so the handoff from sales to customer success, that is a perfect place to run an account-based play, to make sure that you're orchestrating the interactions between those different functions. Beyond that, onboarding, that's a process. That's about coordinating interactions across multiple people on your team with multiple people on their team. You can think about that piece. And then lastly, the whole idea of cross-sell and upsell. And how do you reach out into new divisions and build relationships with other kinds of buyers? Perfect place to be using the kind of strategies we've been talking about.
That's great. Thanks, everybody. We're going to go ahead and end right now. I just want to remind everyone you can go out to engagio.com/guide, and you can download John's book on account-based marketing. We've got contact information again for Rich if you want to reach out and learn more about how to get a persona matrix in your own industry. Remember, we've got our podcasts every week, and out at InsideSales.com/resources, you can go ahead and download the content we've recommended here today. Really appreciate everybody joining us. This account-based everything is a big, big deal. John and Rich, thanks for joining us today, and we will make this available here shortly. Thanks again. We'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.